Today, I want to talk to you about something we've mentioned before on the podcast, but is quite a big deal that most people are probably not very aware of. Human trafficking. Ruth Durnley is the founder and CEO of an anti-human trafficking organisation called Stop the Traffic. She wants to create a world where people are not bought and sold through the prevention and disruption of modern slavery and human trafficking. She focuses on prevention rather than cure and believes that taking a data-led and tech-enabled approach is how people can connect and grow powerful networks that turn insight into action, creating communities that are high risk and low profit to traffickers. Ruth is going to tell us what parents need to know, what we need to tell our kids, and how they can both keep themselves safe and do something to prevent it happening to anyone else. Ruth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for asking me, Helen.
Well, thank you again for being here, because it's I'm super impressed. Ruth just told me before we started recording that she had a big board meeting yesterday, followed by their Christmas party. And it's 9 a.m. when we're recording this. So I'm impressed. First, Ruth, would you tell us a little bit about what human trafficking looks like and why it's more close to home than we might imagine?
So human trafficking is the buying and selling of people. That's at its most simple. But it is a very complicated crime because it's obviously not something that's instantly visible. And in Stop the Traffic, in my journey of the last 18 years, if people could see Stop the Traffic trafficking at one end, it's a business. It's a global, organised criminal business that is there making money. So it's literally where people have found that by exploiting human beings, they can make profit. And for that business, they need to do three things. They need to be able to find the people to recruit into the systems. They need to be able to move the money that they make through our systems, and they need to create demand.
Right.
Now, that all sounds really quite disconnected, doesn't it? But it's a really important image to keep in your head. Because then if I was to say, what does that look like? Well, trafficking is where people are individually coerced or deceived. Most of exploitation is where people are going to something that actually they're really excited about.
Right.
A dream of a job somewhere else, or a move and desire to leave or flee where they are, and they've been offered an education or a place to stay or travel. So individuals can most often not be walking around looking with a sign on them saying I'm being trafficked. They're actually sitting on a plane, excited about what they're going to. And so when we think about what types of exploitation that might look like, I'm sure everybody instantly goes to the being sexually exploited, being at areas of the world. But actually, that can be just exploited labour, being forced to work in a factory or work on a farm or work anywhere in the world at the back of a sandwich shop, doing things and you don't see them when you go in to buy your sandwiches. And they are not being paid for the work they're doing, or they're being paid enough to keep them dependent on the person who is exploiting them, on their trafficker, on their exploiter. And it can also look like somebody in domestic servitude who you'd never see and you might see next door, because they might one day a week be seen putting the bins out. But actually, other than that, they stay in that house and they are being used as a slave within that home. And those can be areas of quite high affluence with big doors that people have somebody who is acting as a slave during the week, looking after the children. Really? And then you get to the point where you actually can traffic organs.
Oh my goodness.
So in the world, if you think of a human being, a human being, if you traffic them, you have to then put them somewhere. You have to keep them healthy if you can, because when they're healthy, you can make money out of them. And you have to find somewhere to put them, and you have to find a premises on which to do whatever you want with them. Whereas organs don't have to do any of that.
Oh my goodness.
So that's where, just going back to everyone, I imagine can remember the amazing film Slumdog Millionaire, and they were removing, eyes and things. So organs to be sold, incredibly profitable.
Right.
And there's a demand. So I've sort of gone from the big business model right down to what does that look like? And then finally, if anyone then goes, well, Ruth, that's hard to listen to, but doesn't really happen here, does it?
Right. That's my next question. So how do we see it?
Yeah. And again, sorry, but the fact is it happens everywhere, and it does happen here. And if anyone's interested, you can go and look at reports that are coming out. But where does exploited labour? Well, only recently we heard that there is a high degree of exploited trafficked labour within our care system. Why? Because there's a high demand. And so people are being recruited and not paid properly and duped and into working in our system. It happens on our farming fields. It happens in agriculture. It happens in factories around our wonderful country, where people are being kept and are being exploited. And it also happens in areas that we've heard a lot of. We've heard a lot of things about county lines where young people are being deceived and coerced into moving drugs, and all those things are linked because they're being exploited. And I'm sure some people, and this, we will turn it to good news, but just those cases in our country, like the Rotherham case and others, where girls were being groomed and then sexually exploited. Now, all those things happen. But I want to just finish this bit, Helen, to just say, again, instantly we might go, well, that might happen to everyone else, but it wouldn't happen to me.
Well, again, that would be my next question.
And what's and interesting to just then bring it right down is, it usually doesn't happen that someone answers an ad here to go, do you want, no one says instantly, oh, I'm being trafficked, or I'm highly vulnerable. What happens is it's a road. So we have to think about trafficking is the end of a road, which started with feeling vulnerable.
Right.
So, all of these things happen when we've all had moments in our own lives where we were vulnerable, where maybe we lost our direction, we didn't have the support of others, we desperately wanted change. It might have been financial, but it might have been actually much more social, family, psychological. And we find ourselves in a place where we become less and less safe. And at that moment, exploiters are looking, whatever it is around the world, for those moments of vulnerability. So we wrote a report a number of years ago with great organisations up in Manchester, where we were looking at the link between homelessness and trafficking. Because there's an area where those people who were homeless and living on the streets, the high percentage of them who were approached by a trafficker.
Really?
Because they are, really vulnerable and open to an offer. And so if someone comes with an offer, we can take you off the streets, we could take you here, which is where the journey then goes to, well, it sounds too good to be true. A job, a home, a place. And I don't know if you remember, quite a long time ago now, there was a case that really made the headlines in the UK, in Leighton Buzzard, where they found a series of men who had been sort of on in a caravan site, and they'd been there for 15 years, and they had been taken off the streets. So it just shows it's something that, number one, vulnerability hits all of us. So we have to just, not in an alarmist way, that doesn't get us anywhere. We have to actually realise that the word trafficking happens, but it's a journey into when we feel vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I'm just wondering if you, and I'm probably putting you on the spot, but I'm wondering if you might be able to tell us a fictitious story of how a teenager might end up in slavery, in modern slavery, how an ordinary teenager, and I completely get the homeless people, and that's one route where people fall out with family, leave family, get kicked out of their family because sometimes families can't cope with behaviour. But is there any other kind of route into, maybe when you talk about the people who are excited to go somewhere, they've got a plane ticket and a job at the end of it, and they're traveling. I'd love to know why those people, when they realize that this isn't what they thought it was, stay.
Well, first of all, when you said examples, I think, the example of where, as I said, sofa surfing, as I learned from a great friend of mine who's just recently done a TED talk. I know you TEDx talk. You saw mine. If you go on TEDx St Albans, actually, I learned a lot from Sarah's talk because she locally works here, and she's a fantastic young woman, and talks about the frequency of sofa surfing. And actually just that, which was becoming more and more prevalent, of just young people spending one night running away, having had enough, finding a friend's sofa to sleep on, and then that becoming over time awkward. Because, all of us, how do you stay for longer than a night and you can't go back home? And just that journey of openness to vulnerability. And I think those things, again, I suppose I want to say this in a good way, normalize or give examples, which is slightly different to the film Taken, where you have this image that the trafficking is where you're in a country where you don't know, and then someone grabs you and puts you in the boot of their car.
And then you're drugged, and you can't leave because you're stuck, and you don't even know where you are, and you're incarcerated. That's what I always imagine. That's the fear that I've said to my daughter, well, my son as well. Like, when you go traveling on your own, just make sure that you're traveling. Don't take lists from anyone you don't know. Make sure you're in a licensed taxi. And that's probably the least risk, isn't it?
And I don't want to say it doesn't happen ever like that, because of course it does in some parts of the world, but the majority is where somebody is actually offered something to help them out. Because that's what, in many ways, we call it grooming.
Yeah, I was just thinking it sounds like grooming.
Just grooming, isn't it? Which is that sense of, I'm here to help you. Now, when you say, how does that, one of the things to look out for around that is, somebody meets someone and suddenly they seem to have new things. Where'd you get that new phone from? Or a friend gave it me. Well, they just gave you a new phone. And they are signs to look out for.
Right.
Because, and actually those things happen. I'm going to take you to Bali. We ran a campaign there, and that was where young girls were being offered really beautiful handbags. And that was the really clever key of, look, we've got these handbags because they were the most desired thing there at that time. So, well, you can have one. Yeah, you can have one. And the first time when you have something, you don't have to do anything. But then, of course, the next time, well, I could give you this. Again, I've got something else for you. And then what slowly happens is, but you can only have this if you do this.
Okay.
Would you come and do it? And that is almost, there's the grooming process, isn't it? And
Yeah.
there's fantastic podcasts and books and lots of resources around, practical advice of spotting those signs and being able to then know what to do instantly. Because I would just say instantly talk about it. That's my fundamental thing. If you have any suspicion or any fear that that's happening, ask, talk about it. The most powerful weapon of any exploiter is silence. The most powerful weapon of any crime is silence. And so what we need to do is instantly ask, where did you get that from? And just see.
Yeah.
Now, if it's always those web of lies, which leads to your second question, which is, why don't people leave? And I have had that. Why don't people leave? I started Stop the Traffic those years ago around the 200th anniversary of the abolition of transatlantic slave trade. And if we think back to that era of slavery, we would say it was very visible because people were in chains and we could see. If you went down to the port side and looked at boats of individuals, human beings being trafficked, it was visible. They walked with chains around their legs. They were visibly imprisoned.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge of today is we can't see them. They're not. And we might just see people, as we said, looking excited about where they're going or the journey.
Yeah.
But once people are dependent on another by fear and abuse and threat, a system sets in where they can't leave. You don't need, after a while, to lock people in. So you will go instantly. Of course, people are locked in and people try to escape. But it's like saying to somebody in a domestic violence situation, well, why do you leave? And it's exactly the same syndrome because people become dependent on their trafficker.
Yes.
In fact, there are many, many instances around the world of where people may have been rescued and then they go back because actually the life they have found, the dependency, the normality that they find in that circumstance is the thing that then becomes normalized. And that's why the journey of rehabilitation, when somebody has been rescued from that situation, takes a long time because you are not just giving physical freedom, but the emotional, psychological freedom that needs to come of finding a new way of being.
Yes, I can imagine some people in some situations may become quite dependent if they'd been rescued from a situation that felt intolerable. And it feels like a structure that they can make work for them.
And many people, don't they? We just go back to the interplay between this and gangs. I'm sure all your listeners have you've had talks about how gangs work. Well, gang is the belonging to a community that cares. So-called. It is a family. It is a community that is an alternative to maybe one that feels too restrictive or one that has collapsed. So it's a response. Well, trafficking is exactly the same thing. You're building emotionally into you belong to this community. In fact, in trafficking, you belong to me. You belong to me. So there is a dehumanization of how somebody sees themselves at that end. So, somebody, we've just told a researcher, I'll take you abroad again so people get a global picture. But we've just had a case that we've just talked about where somebody contacted us, a young man who was in a factory in Myanmar. Now, he was very skillful in technology. He had responded to a job and been recruited to what he thought was his dream job. In fact, Helen, he'd been interviewed on a panel. It had been a really tough process. So everywhere down that line, And that process, he believed he was going to something truly genuine with a really strong salary. And he was going to be flown. In fact, he was given $1,000 for the process. Look, we'll give you this money up front to take you there. So you can almost think this is too good to be true.
Yeah. Well, it just sounds great.
I mean, there's a young man with those skills applying for a job, advertised on social media or online, and he got through the panels, got through the interview, and he was moving from the Middle East across into Asia. And the only moment where he realized something was wrong was on the third transport change, when he was asked to get in a boat. And then the alarm bells began to ring. And at that point, it was too late, because then he was threatened. Now, he went into a factory where he was basically frauding people online. So he was forced, because of his tech skills, and he was an English speaker, to go online. It's a horrible term. You'll see it. They call it pig butchering, and it's now a very prolific type of trafficking. But it's people being exploited, like this young man, to exploit others in fraud online. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm telling you, there's a story of where that journey, job too good to be true. He was there a year. But because one day he sent us a message, he just sent Stop the Traffic out the blue, a message to say what was happening to him. Mm. And then over those weeks, he and 100 others who were with him from different countries safely shared information that began to build up a picture of what was happening. And to cut a long story short, our role is to understand and build that sort of information picture that no one had, because it's only when you start to bring different bits of information from other partners we built a picture that could then begin to understand what had happened and what was happening. And then we shared it with everyone who could do something. So we shared it with, law enforcement and Interpol. We shared it with the banks. We shared it with governments. We shared it with NGOs on the ground. We shared it. And we managed to build a system of interaction, and those people were freed. But more than that, the network that relies on the money collapsed. Yeah. Now, that gives people at this stage, we can disrupt this.
Yes,
but
clearly.
Coming back down, how did we disrupt it? We disrupt it because people share what they know. So bring that back down to the people listening. Yeah. I'm a mum, I feel much, much better, even though my kids, they're going to be 30. Anyway, I can't believe that. I'm just telling everyone that. I can't believe that.
It happens, folks.
30. But I feel better when they talk to me. Full stop. That's just me, isn't it? As a mum, it doesn't mean it's always happened, and it hasn't. And there've been times where they're not.
I was just gonna say that. What's your tips for making that happen? Because there'd be a lot of people listening to this at the moment thinking, yeah, that would be lovely if my kids would talk to me.
And I think what's interesting is, as you say, some stages, and actually it's quite right, sometimes they don't talk to us. Sometimes it's really right that they're actually talking to other people. Yeah. That they're actually telling other people and their friends or people they trust. They're learning that trust currency. Because if my nearly 30-year-old had to talk to me about everything, then I don't think I've done my job to enable them to go and be independent and live well.
True. So the message you're saying is that they're experimenting with building their own support networks, and that's the comfort we should take when our kids stop talking to us for a bit.
And we don't want it to happen forever, but isn't it interesting? That support network is vital. Yeah. Because there will be times where they don't, won't, or can't talk to us. But we must make sure they can talk to others, because the biggest thing at the root to disrupt trafficking is to share something.
Yeah.
And that means sharing information with Interpol at one end. Yeah. But at our end, it's all the same principle. You can't stop what you can't see. And you can only see it if you can share and be able to build a picture of it.
Yeah, yeah. And you do all this with data, don't you? You're very tech data heavy at Stop the Traffic. How does that work?
Well, I've got much cleverer people than me who know how to do it. But the way, in a simple picture for me, I talked about the need at the very beginning about this being a business. Whether it's somebody spending $1,000 into a man that then got trafficked into Myanmar, whether it's somebody paying through a gift of a mobile to a young person today to start grooming them to be part of their gang to then traffic drugs and then get trafficked themselves. Yes, in our cities today, it actually starts with needing a business to recruit. You've just heard me talk about how people are recruited. Recruited is people being, sucked in.
Yeah.
Moving the money and the demand. Because we're all part of this, Helen. We're all wearing clothes that have supply chains linked to people. We're all putting in our shopping trolleys. So we're all part of this. We all use banks that this money goes through, which isn't for me pointing a finger at everyone out there. It means point the finger back at us because we're all part of the solution. And so therefore, to be able to look at that on a global level, as well as seeing the power of one person's story, the thing that joins all that together is information. Information is the power. Traffickers share what they know. That's what they're really good at. They share the information of, where the corrupt officials are. Where the easy bank accounts are, where the journey and the logistics and the transport links are. Who are the people that will take their people to the other side of the town and not tell anyone? They share. And my journey has been, we need to build a movement, an organisation, a world network of networks that shares, and that shares more than them. And that is what Stop the Traffic has built, that capability. So we have a data hub, which is basically a place where lots of different information across, the web, and from an app that we have that is anonymous reporting tool, and from where people share what they know, like this young man. So we have that sort of data warehouse, a safe, secure place where what you share goes to something that is keeping it safe. And then when you think about that with lots and lots of different sets of information, in order to paint the best picture so we can uncover what's actually going on, we need to analyse that. And there's the tools that are, I've got crazy names, but tools that you can basically analyse, which of course is all down the road of AI that everyone's talking about, because we can begin to then use tools that look at patterns and we can predict. So we can see routes of where people are moving or being recruited, or hotspots where particular vulnerable community. Then what we do is package those insights and share them with all the actors that can do things. But importantly, speaking here, is we use them to go upstream, because that's where prevention happens. Upstream, to reach people with messaging on their mobiles, so that before they move or on the move, they receive information that enables them to make a choice. Different choices to safety, hope and choice, rather than into the place where it's too late. So Stop the Traffic has reached about over 25 million people that way in the last 8 years. Finding routes, particularly, say, in recent years around women moving across Europe and fleeing Ukraine. So we did a huge piece of work for 20 months around there. Refugees moving out of Syria. And actually we do campaigns in the UK, young people who are vulnerable to county lines. There you go, that grooming. So we are targeting those routes because our messages have to be to a young person looking at that phone as they scroll through all the things they love looking at.
Mm-hmm.
We want them to come across a message that doesn't scare them, because fear doesn't turn us into do anything good. But actually that they look at and they go, gosh, that's me.
Yeah.
Gosh, look, that story. And that's the clever way of being able to tell a story. And then for them to go, that's something that's really important, I know. And you know what I love about young people? Young people have formed the basis so much of what happens at Stop the Traffic and prevention around the world, is what young people do is they talk to their friends.
Yeah.
They might not talk to us all the time, but they talk to their friends. And that peer community is so important, because often they'll tell their friends something before anything else.
Yeah.
They share, don't they? They share.
Absolutely. And that's one good reason for social media. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Social media, it can be used for bad, but it can also be incredibly useful and helpful and supportive.
It's not going to go away, social media.
Exactly. We just have to
learn
use
how
it better.
to use it better. And so when everyone says, why do we work with those, social media, digital companies, tech companies? Because traffickers do. And traffickers aren't going to stop. We have a duty to do it.
Yeah. And we can't cancel it. I say this all the time. In fact, I've got an episode way back in the early stages of the podcast about how to let your teenager be online and trust that they're using it wisely and effectively rather than it being damaging, because there's so many parents, and I think it's a fear-based thing, but so many parents who don't understand social media, and that's a lot of us because we didn't grow up with it, just want to see control and regulation put in on, and of course there is a place for control and regulation, but they just want to control social media and the internet out of their children's lives for as long as they can. And I think it's counterproductive. I will not get on my soapbox about this one, but I think we have to embrace it and teach kids what's safe and what's not safe there, so that they can use it effectively, because as you say, it isn't going anywhere and it's only going to get bigger and more part of our lives.
What's next? Everyone, it is more prolific and it has a greater impact because of the way technology has impacted our lives. I was just saying, to someone yesterday, I think in 1992 was, when the web hit the world. Now, that's only 30 some bit years ago.
Yeah.
Now, who'd have thought 30 years ago? I'm 58, everyone, if you can't see me. I look about 98 today, I tell you. But anyway, I'm 58.
Christmas party.
But, in my lifetime, there was a time when there was no web. Now, I know, we all know with our kids nowadays, it's like, that is like...
That's inconceivable, isn't it? I'm a very similar age, Ruth, and I was well into my career before. In fact, I remember my boss and the CEO of our company floating an idea that instead of voicemail on our car phones, we might switch to email. And I was dead set against it. I could not stand the idea of having to check a computer every night when I got home.
And it's true but I'm the same. I can remember my first phone. I can remember the most excitement about my first BlackBerry. But I think 30 years ago, who'd have thought that in 3 decades, the whole world,
we'd be here.
World would be different. Now, we can't turn and don't want to turn that back, because we all know that so many of the world are alive, are fed, are safe because of that. So for me, going back down to the mobile, like so many inventions, criminals and criminality use it first and use it better. And that I learned from a very dear policeman, a friend of mine, that actually when the car was first invented, it was the criminals that used it first and better. So this is just a pattern that we're not very good at thinking ahead. We react, we don't predict and prevent. And that's why my passion is prevention. And actually, you can't stop what you can't see, but when you share with your kids what you can see in a way that empowers them, then the tool in their hand is as much the weapon to fight exploitation as it is a weapon to cause it. And they have the power to make choices. Now, that's totally agreed at ages and what age, but that is our approach, that actually we've got to get better at looking at that. And we have to think, what next? There's no point people fighting with the regulate. I mean, now, because in the next 30 years,
yes,
who knows? What is it that's coming? So the principles of how we learn what's true, who to trust, how, if somebody says something and it's too good to be true, it probably isn't true. How to get that instinct that you wouldn't trust someone because they're trying to give you something for no reason.
Yeah, how do you get that instinct when you're a really hopeful, excited teenager wanting the future to come sooner?
And you know, I haven't got all the answers to this, having brought up two wonderful now adults, because we all, them and me, make mistakes, don't we? That's part of the joy of parenting.
Yeah.
Is actually reeling all of us. We're all making it. So one, we need each other. I truly believe in community. We cannot do this parenting or anything, living on our own. We need each other because other people will talk to your children better than you at times, or they'll listen. Secondly, they won't do something we're not doing. I always think you have to walk the talk. Don't use your mobile at the table.
Right.
And then we're all sitting there. I think it's quite funny watching. It's an instinctive reaction that we're all there. You're not listening to me, Mum. You know, and I did. That was me, by the way, the other year. So this isn't teenagers. And I went, I'm really sorry. Put my phone down. Let's go.
Yeah. No, it's really hard.
Because actually there is something really important. We're talking about the basic instinctive social skill where you sense and know something isn't right when someone's talking. How do you trust someone? And isn't this in some ways just the same as us watching films about don't walk with strangers? I remember those when I was young, those films that told you, you know, how to not be taken by a stranger. Do you remember those films? Well, it's only the same thing. It's just we're translating language from a physical presence of someone to something that we're seeing online. And I honestly think this generation are very, very much smarter because they're used to that more than we were.
Yeah, of course.
Fake news in the world is how we uncover that. How do we actually uncover and test that something's true? And we're back to this, you know, making things transparent, shining a light on it. So I don't think you can divorce physical reality and online. They're both real. And those things, though, your instinct, your human brain and instinct to have alerts to say something doesn't feel quite right there, are born out of the relationships of who we have trusted. You know, what did it feel like to trust? You know, I trust my friends, and then I was let down by them, and then we said sorry.
Yeah, you're right.
And then we said sorry, and then we made friends again, and that felt really good. Or I was really hurt by this person, and I was taken in and they didn't really care. And it's those human instincts, isn't it, that feed our brains and our souls to know that there's a little alert that when you meet something, it just doesn't feel.
That's quite reassuring, actually, Ruth, because as a parent, you go through all these phases of your kids falling out with people at school and their friendship group breaking up and rupture and repair. I'm a big one for repair after rupture, but if it ruptures, what I'm trying to say is as a parent, it's very easy to get very caught up in that. And it's not fair. I want to wade in and sort this out for my child. They need their life to be perfect. Actually, there's real value in their lives not being perfect and them experiencing some pain and difficulty because as you've just kind of illustrated, that's how they learn who to trust and what they actually want in the world. So it's really interesting. Goodness, we could go off on a huge tangent and be here for hours, Ruth. And I thought we would just have a simple conversation about human trafficking. And I haven't even asked you yet about your teenage years. Before I do, I just want to say to anyone that's listened this far and is interested in finding out more, I will put a link to Ruth's organisation, Stop the Traffic, in the show notes. And Ruth also talked about Sarah, who I've also invited to be on the podcast to talk about homelessness at some point. So I will put links to both Ruth's and Sarah's TEDx talks, which were both fantastic, also in the show notes. Ruth, you also, I'm going to talk to you afterwards because you also mentioned some resources, books and things that people can read. So I'm going to ask you if you might be able to share those with me so that I can add links to the show notes for anyone that wants to get a little bit more into the depth of the research about this and arm themselves with some more information. Ruth, normally I ask this question right at the beginning, but I think it's kind of nice to do it as a sign off. Tell us, if you will, about your own teenage years. What was it like growing up for you?
Do you know, I always look back now and have done just really thankful. And I just have to say that, and I'm just thankful because I have parents that really love me. And I think that is such a gift, isn't it? I don't think, everyone, I heard someone say on some show the other day, I had perfect parents. And I thought that's a weird phrase because none of us are perfect. And you've just said it. That just makes me slightly suspicious then, because none of us are perfect. And actually life isn't, whatever that means. Life is full of its traumas, its joy, its loss, its celebration. And actually being brought up is being part of that, isn't it? And sharing in that and being part of finding ways to cope as you get older. But there was a lot of protection and prevention when you're younger, which is what I then did with mine.
Mm-hmm.
When they're little, you don't sort of go, well, I'm going to let you totter across the lounge and I can see you're going to hit your head on the coffee table, and I'm going to let you hit your head on the coffee table because it's going to teach you what pain feels like.
Yeah.
Of course, you don't do that. And I am a prevention fiend, you see. I was always the one that is everywhere protecting and making things not happen, which means for me, it became harder, painful when bad things do happen. And then
I'm hearing you.
Of helping strategize through, because we've been part of knowing what pain or challenge feels like. My parents were wonderful. My dad, still alive, was a university lecturer and in Liverpool. And my mum was the most glorious playgroup leader. And figure of the community, where the door was always being knocked on and people coming to talk to her about anything and everything in life. And
oh wow!
And so I had these fantastic role models of very different, diverse personalities. And we were also part of a church, which also meant we had an instant community, of very different people. The one thing about the churches is the best ones, it's not all about all being the same. So you meet such diverse individuals and learn a lot about trust. So my parents were such a gift to me. And now my mum died 10 years ago. Now at this end of my life, my dad has Alzheimer's, and so I'm caring for him. And I suppose I'm saying this, I know everyone here, you've all got parents of teenagers, and it's a particular phase, but life goes in circles, doesn't it? And I realize as well the moments when my kids are also now checking up on me. We care for each other. And I think I just want to bring that. There's the richness of life, is that when they're teenagers, part of life's ups and downs, challenges, and I know for some people on this, actually really, really hard times. It's not where it's just life's learning. It's actually despair. And it's really difficult. And I'm not wanting to minimize that at all. That's another podcast and another subject. But in terms of how to come back to, do we prevent, protect? our kids around falling into exploitation and this thing called trafficking that I've been talking about as a global crime is that community of generations and friends and community, whether it's a network or a social network, all those things are the strongest matrix for resilience of life.
Yeah.
They're the things that make life real and tangible and and it could be also the online community for your teenage. It could be absolutely there that they feel they're most them and they've got people they talk to. So I suppose all those years ago when I was being brought up, it was a different generation. It was a different age, but I had that. I had a matrix of communities. I had relationships of people that I could talk to. They were my parents and they weren't. When I really hated my parents, or not hate, but, you know, those moments feel like that when you're 14, I had someone else. And now that forms the basis of why and how I believe you can prevent trafficking. Because when you've got those places, those people, those spaces to trust, you'll share what you know. And the minute you tell someone something, it changes the power that that information has or that person, especially if there's danger attached to it. The minute you say it, it changes. It changes and becomes less dangerous. And so that matrix of ability to be able to have friends and family online and offline would still be the ability to share, talk.
Yeah.
And it will prevent trafficking.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're speaking to, Ruth, is belonging. And if you belong somewhere, then you don't need to go looking for somewhere unhealthy to belong. And you don't need to be rescued and told that you belong elsewhere. Thank you so much, Ruth. This has been a brilliant conversation. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, everybody. Happy parenting.
Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Thank you too to everyone who's already rated and reviewed the podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Amazon, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review. It really helps get the word out, as well as making me very happy to read what you have to say. If this episode strikes a chord for you, please share it with anyone else you know who might be in the same boat, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. If you have a story or a suggestion for something you'd like to see covered on the podcast, you can email me at teenagekickspodcast@gmail.com or message me on Instagram. I am Helen Woods. I love hearing from all my listeners. It really makes a difference to me on this journey. See you next week when I'll be chatting to another brilliant guest about the highs and lows of parenting teens. Bye for now.